This is the Defenders Podcast on TV Podcast Industries. We're talking about Moon Knight, Episode 3.
You've been banished once for nearly exposing us, Khonshu. And you know we despise your garishness, your showy masks and weapons. But manipulate the sky again, and we will imprison you in stone.
Spare me your self-righteous threats! I was banished for not abandoning humanity unlike the rest of you.
We have not abandoned humanity. They abandoned us. We simply trust our avatars to carry out our purposes without calling undue attention to ourselves. Not like some of us.
Avatars are not enough! We need the might of gods! Return from the opulence of the overvoid before you lose this realm!
Welcome back once again, fellow Defenders, to the midway point of Moon Knight. We're talking about Moon Knight Episode 3. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow Defenders. I am one of your other hosts, John, and in the immortal words of Yoda, there is another.
And rounding out this trio of podcasting identities, I am Chris.
You were setting Chris up there with that, weren't you? Okay.
I didn't know that, but yes, it works quite well.
Excellent. Great to have all three of us here for another episode of Moon Knight. Fun one this time as well.
Yeah, definitely. Loved it.
Yeah, some cool...
Ancient Egyptian gods, crazy stuff with the night sky,
Crazy knife fights.
yes.
Oh, yes.
That we don't get to see.
Exactly. Throwbacks to 1970 sort of house parties with cheese and pineapple cocktail sticks.
Oh, yes.
Well, that'll be an interesting one to talk about. If you haven't seen the episode, jump off now. This is our spoiler-filled discussion about episode 3 of Moon Knight. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do that as well. You can subscribe over on our website at tvpodcastindustries.com. We'll be talking about feedback on episode 2 later on in the podcast after we discuss episode 3. So we'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode as well. We kick straight into the episode details.
Yes, Derek, give us what you got.
Absolutely. The executive producers for this show are Kevin Feige, Louis Desposito, Victoria Alonso, Grant Curtis, Brand Winderbaum, Oscar Isaac, Mohamed Diab, and Jeremy Slater. This episode, once again, directed by executive producer Mohamed Diab, and the episode was written by 3 wonderful writers, Beau DeMayo, Peter Cameron, and Sabir Pirzada. Now, we've talked about Beau DeMayo this year because he wrote 2 episodes of Witcher, one in season 1 and season 2, and he also wrote the animated Witcher movie, Season of the Wolf.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Which was really good.
It was really good. And like, his episode of Witcher this season was one of the best episodes of the season, as far as I remember.
Definitely.
Yeah. We also talked about Peter Cameron. Peter Cameron was an executive producer on WandaVision and wrote 2 episodes of that show too. Good stuff.
Yeah. Liking it so far.
Absolutely. And Sabir Pirzada, we haven't talked about them before, but they did write on Roswell, New Mexico and Person of Interest in the past. And also the writer of the next episode as well.
Okay, excellent stuff.
Yeah, good stuff. John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis of episode 3 of Moon Knight?
Sure. In the desert sands of Egypt, Arthur Harrow finds the location of Ammits' tomb, fully aware that Marc Spector is on his tail. Dispatching 3 acolytes to slow down Marc's progress, they kill one of his contacts and attack Marc. The ensuing knife fight on the roofs above Cairo makes Steven and Grant distinctly uncomfortable, but as both Marc and Steven fight for control of their body, a series of blackouts leaves 2 of Harrow's men dead, but neither Marc or Steven can recall how it happened. The attempt to extract intel from the remaining acolyte doesn't go well, and desperate to stop Harrow from releasing Ammit from her stone prison, Khonshu calls a meeting of the Egyptian gods. Harrow is called to answer the accusations levelled at him, but he persuades the gods that Khonshu, a shamed god, is using the Ennead and abusing his avatar for his feud with Ammit. Khonshu is warned by the other gods that any further violation of the ancient laws will see him punished. With few options left, Marc is given a new lead to find Ammit's location by Hathor's avatar Yatzil, who tells him to find Senfu's sarcophagus and is unexpectedly joined in Egypt by Layla, exploiting an uneasy relationship with a wealthy man called Anton Mogart, who grants them access under heavy guard to the mummified body of Senfu. Layla implores Marc to allow Steven out so that he can help find the clues in the markings on Senfu's body, but the delicate truce is broken by the arrival of Harrow, who destroys the sarcophagus using the power of Ammits. As the dust of Senfu settles, Anton sets his guards on Marc and Layla, who are confronted by both Moon Knight, Mr. Knight, and Layla as they escape. In the desert, Steven deciphers the constellation that will help them navigate to the true resting place of Ammit, but Khonshu must again turn to desperate measures. He turns back the night sky to align the constellation as it was back in ancient Egypt, so that Steven and Layla can find Ammit and Arthur Harrow. But his actions once again provokes the anger of the ancient Egyptian gods, who imprison Khonshu in stone.
Ooh, ending the episode with taking out Khonshu.
Yes, and a nice little ornament for the mantelpiece,
Absolutely.
I think.
I'm sure that's going to be available on Etsy pretty soon, or at least officially on
so.
Amazon, maybe.
Yes, if you get the line of the 9 gods.
That would be very, very cool for the mantelpiece. Let's get into our full moon point, our first point about the episode. Let's start off with the Council of Ennead. This kind of wraps the entire start of the episode. We start off with a big kind of action sequence, really, with the knife fight on the roof with Harrow's acolytes as Marc's trying to find his way to Harrow, who's in Egypt, tracking down the sarcophagus of Abbott. This was an awesome sequence. I really enjoyed it. I know you mentioned earlier on, Chris, we didn't see the knife fights, but we do see the opening of the knife fights. We do get a bit of the action to begin with as Marc, in his regular persona, not as Moon Knight, is fighting against these 3 acolytes. I love how they used it. It's almost like a dance in this knife fight as they jump over each other and they disguise their moves as they're attacking Marc with their knives. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this was great. And it really does show why Marc was a fearsome mercenary back in the day on his own accord prior to being Khonshu's avatar. I enjoyed this for a few reasons. I enjoyed it because this looks like the fight sequence we saw years ago when they were training, when it was the pre-viz, it wasn't pre-viz, it was basically when they were training up for the filming of the show.
Yes, I think Oscar Isaac put that out on his Instagram, didn't he? A video of him doing the stunt work, basically.
Yeah. And it was essentially stunt work with a knife. And I was like, oh, okay, this is what we were missing.
Yeah.
This is it. And it was fun. It's great to see. It's interesting. And it does show off like a bit more of his style. It is kind of a bit more visceral. And we've seen that from the end of episode 1 where he goes to town on the dog.
Yeah.
So he is very hardcore and he takes it out on the kid. As we see, he's trying, don't make me do this. Okay, you're going to make me do this. So I overall, I really enjoyed this. There is obviously 2 aspects that I really want to discuss about the knife fight, but less the knife fight. First being, we do get confirmation post the knife fight that one of Khonshu's gifts is this accelerated healing.
Yes.
That Marc uses to his advantage, apparently. Because Khonshu does call out, like, you would have died many times if not for my kind of accelerated help.
Absolutely. It's kind of part of the superpower that's given to him as being Moon Knight, effectively.
Yes.
So we saw that a little bit in episode 2. We saw when Steven transformed into Mr. Knight and fell off a building. He wasn't injured. So he kind of ducked and rolled, but he wasn't injured from that fall. So he's also got that power from Khonshu as well, where he's able to survive things he probably wouldn't be able to survive without the help of Khonshu.
Yeah. Just coming back on that, I saw a tweet there indicating that it was Oscar Isaac's idea to roll after the landing.
Oh, when he turns into Mr. Knight.
I was thinking, because we thought it certainly the comedic element to that, and I think we were talking about how Marvel are looking for ways to change up the hero landing.
Yeah,
but it's also that's the first time that Stephen Grant effectively calls that power or that happens to him.
Yeah.
And he's falling off a ledge, so his natural tendency would be duck and roll to
course,
try
yeah.
and soften the fall, if he could at all, from however many levels he was up on the building. So
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of a nice little touch in that scene.
Yeah,
But
it's a nice character moment, and it also makes it also helps Marvel with their superhero landing.
Exactly,
problem.
exactly.
It works really well when you do that. That's a good thing to propose if you're an actor and you want to get something that you've decided on in your show. Make sure it fits two purposes.
Yeah. Well, and also just going back to Chris's, with the superpowers or the powers, I should say, of Khonshu, and is he a superhero? I guess so. If he can do that.
An anti-superhero, if you will.
He can also control the weather. In terms of how he tries to get the attention of the other gods.
He can certainly control the moon. So that's his big connection, I suppose. He is the moon god,
I guess through the moon somehow. Because he pulls in all the clouds, it darkens the sky. So really good. I really kind of enjoyed that.
That was really cool.
Yeah.
That's how he effectively is calling the Council of Inia. But one other point about the knife fight we do need to talk about is obviously the switching in and out from Steven to Marc. This must be so irritating for Marc, where Marc's looking into the knife and Steven's in the knife going, "Oh, you can't do this." He's really disturbed by the idea of him killing people, basically, and then suddenly takes over possession of the body. And Marc wakes back up in the back of a taxi cab on the way to the airport, which is hilarious. But again, must be really annoying for Marc because he's in the middle of a fight. That he jumps back out, sees the guys that Steven's obviously freed, and then tries to chase them down again through the streets of Cairo as Marc, and then changes again when he sees Steven in the reflection as he's trying to extract this information from one of the acolytes. You see the brutality of Marc all the way through this. Like we said back in episode 1, we wanted to see that other side of the fight. We wanted to see what was happening with Marc when he was in control of the body. So we see all the fighting. We see him being really threatening with one of the acolytes. And all of this stuff is scaring Marc into taking back possession of the body effectively. So, so that's been really interesting. Yeah,
no, huge. And the fight is visceral itself. It's just, as you said, it's so... Yeah, I think it's the best word. Visceral.
Yeah. Really well choreographed.
Well, that's it. It's kind of, the reflection of Steven in the knife blade, really great touch, like you say. But also, I liked Marc punching the knife blade to punch the guy attacking him.
Yes.
There was almost that Indiana Jones moment. Okay, no gun involved, but it was... he was posturing with the knife. Look how good I am with the knife skills. As you say, it was a bit like a dance. He does the circle almost, the fighting circle or the boundary that Marc can't cross. So I just kind of liked that side of it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, really good. And we kind of get the bigger reveal here that there's a third identity as this fight progresses, and we start to see less and less of it effectively as Marc keeps waking up with different outcomes going on. I think the third time he returns to the body, he wakes up and sees the bodies around him, and Steven says it wasn't him. So a reveal here that we do have a third identity.
Yes.
And neither of them are aware of who that is.
No.
Exactly. Are we going
Very
to get
cool.
a comic book Jake Lockley?
Well,
a third identity from the comic books, or is it something else, something new for the show?
It might be. What I find really interesting about the character of Jake Lockley is that he has got a mustache, so does look different to the other two characters. So I love the speculation that if we do see Jake in the show, we'll see Oscar Isaac taking a fake mustache out of his pocket and sticking it on his face to show that he's a different character than the other two.
Yeah. And he was the character in the comic books is the man on the street, taxi driver, cabbie, kind of like the real New York man kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm very much interested to see just the third accent.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is it going to be? Yeah. Or are they going to make it like, oh, well, he's South African. And it's all of a sudden we've got a South African, an English, and an American walking into a bar.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know that joke.
We have no idea how this is going to play out in the show, of course, but and we haven't seen anything to do with Jake Lockley at all in the show. But I love the kind of how much it kind of scares both Marc and Steven that there's someone that's effectively murdered two people, and neither of them know who it was.
Yeah, exactly. An unknown here for both Marc and Steven.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really a nice little bit to those blackouts. That were occurring,
and then leads to the kind of end of this sequence, I suppose, with Khonshu giving some really bad advice to Marc to threaten the youngest of the three acolytes by hanging him off a cliff. And the acolyte kills himself rather than giving up Harrow. So this moment with Marc where he's following the guidance from Khonshu, who thinks there's no way this kid's going to do anything. He'll definitely give up Harrow, and then he's just left holding the end of his tie.
Yeah.
And it's even just Khonshu's sort of deadpan response to that. He goes, I really thought he would talk. You know, a really good. And you have Steven saying, you know, if you have a problem with the body count, stop listening to the old pigeon.
Yes.
I thought it was really good. It really felt Khonshu and the two identities really sort of coming together in this moment. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the fun part of this whole sequence, which is it, as you said, it's the three identities. And when I say three, I'm not talking about this question mark. I'm talking about Khonshu as the overall entity. And then Marc and Steven, and just the different approach they have, and the interesting hijinks that we can get. We could just get a whole episode, and I would watch a whole episode of them just going back and forth in a fight. Literally just like, and it's just this blackout, and then things like, oh no, Steven, let the people go again. And they're like, the Joe Blogs henchman is like, what is going on? You're like beating us up, and then you let us go, and then you're beating us up. Like, and over the course of 24 hours. Yeah. Like, it would be an amazing storyline. Jed McKay, if you're listening to us, please write that one. That's what I want to see.
It was really good to see it this way. Again, it's similar to what we thought in episode 1 when you see all the violence perpetrated by Marc, but you don't see what's happening with it. This time you see Steven, I guess, negotiating with the acolytes. You see him having conversations with, or you don't see him having conversations with them, but you see the aftermath where they're being freed. I love the reaction of the taxi driver who's taking Marc to the airport, and Marc suddenly starts speaking Arabic to him, and he goes, hang on a second, a minute ago you were acting like a tourist. How are you acting like a local now? Very good.
That was really good. Yeah. But I as well, I think just closing that out, I love how, coming back to Khonshu, he, you know, you can see that he's desperate, and that they need to try and find Harrow and the resting place of Ammits. But he's just like, I have a bad idea. He knows what he has to do is a bad idea. It's going to irk the other gods. I really like how he disappeared. It's almost like he spins out, to nothing. That was quite cool as well.
Yeah. I like that. And using quite a massive power here to create this partial, eclipse,
I guess.
Yeah, in order to call the gods, because they know Khonshu's there, but they are not very happy with Khonshu.
I just realized I said he controlled the weather, because I thought he brought loads of clouds that darken the sky, but no, it's an eclipse.
Yes.
He brought the moon.
Yeah, exactly.
To darken the sky.
I was wondering what you were saying there, John, but I'm glad you corrected
it. It's been a long week, I guess.
It is. The moon are clouds. There you go.
Cloud night.
Yes. Something like that. Yes. Let's talk a little bit about the avatars and the Ennead. So we have this idea that each of the former Egyptian gods still has an avatar on Earth, and they're representing them at this kind of conclave, or this council of the Ennead that Khonshu has summoned, so they can hear his testimony, I suppose, about Arthur Harrow. Really like this idea. We do kind of get an Eternals-like explanation for what happened to the gods. I wondered if this was going to be something that we'd see in the show. They effectively are now saying that they're watchers. They were gods in the past. People have forgotten them, and they just sit and watch, but never interfere with the lives of humans. So again, this is the reason why they've stayed out of it and why we didn't see Moon Knight in Endgame, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it goes back to that, the first episode where you have Steven looking through the book, and it talks about that separation, that break between God and man. And so, now they are simply there by proxy with their avatars, watching, no interference. So almost like the Eternals, really, in that sense. And, it was really good seeing, all the avatars assemble and the nice flicker of white light in the eyes to see when the gods have taken control of them. And again, just Steven's mannerisms as they're coming into the main pyramid at Giza is like, oh my days, we're inside the Great Pyramid. It's just,
That's right,
it's
he's
really
reflected in the
nice
wall,
touches like that, because I think everyone would be like, wow. And this is like a moment for Steven. It's just the mannerisms that Oscar Isaac keeps changing, between these two identities. There's another great one at the end, of the episode as well, towards the end of the episode, which is where Layla is asking Mark to, give his identity over to Steven so that they can read the map that they've taken from Senfu's body. And it's just with the headlights of the Jeep, and it goes from Mark to Steven.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's, whether there is a cut in there, I don't know, but it's perfectly seamless if there is.
Yeah.
And I'm almost convinced that Oscar Isaacs probably just did that as one go. I'm convinced of it, given
it's weird, isn't it? Yeah, it's
how he's changing.
Exactly, it's the scene where you see Mark, and he's got his cool haircut, and he's standing, and his posture is really powerful, and then you just see the eyebrows raise, and it almost looks like he's got this really stupid haircut. And it's like it doesn't sit the same way on Steven as it does on Mark, and it's just a movement of his facial expression.
Yeah, it's really good.
Fantastic.
It's
well, Oscar Isaac is fantastic in this. We hear from one of the avatars that effectively the gods are going to possess you. You just need to go with it. And I love what Oscar Isaac does here as Khonshu possesses him to speak to the Ennead. You can see he's fighting the whole time. He's fighting against Khonshu speaking his voice through him the whole time. I think that's just so interesting to watch what Oscar Isaac's doing here.
It's, for me, the old Ennead scene is just so much fun to see, that the shouts from Khonshu, and it's again, like, it's not even just Mark and Steven and how Oscar Isaac is portraying those two. When Khonshu takes over, and the fight from Oscar Isaac in the scene, it's just fantastic. Really is. And it's, again, we see this disdain that Khonshu has for the other gods, and their lack of, because he gets, essentially, he wants them to interfere. He wants them to lead their people. And they don't want to anymore. They just want to be the Watchers.
Yeah, and the disdain they have for him as well.
Oh, and that's from his interference, continued interference.
Yeah, it's almost like they don't like his methods.
Yeah.
We hear Harrow talking that he is a shamed god. And, it's almost, because Harrow is called as well to the pyramid, and Harrow uses that sort of perception of the other gods to his advantage as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you're kind of thinking this is one of the Ennead. Khonshu is a member of the Ennead. He's telling them that this guy is about to release someone they've already imprisoned. Harrow is not an avatar of Ammit. He's a follower of Ammit, but he's not her avatar. He's accusing him of doing this, of about to free another god that they've punished, and the Ennead listen to his testimony where he goes, but Khonshu, he's always messing about with humans. You don't want to get involved. And they go, we believe you, Harrow, and send him off on his way. It's kind of a big surprise. This was the last ditch play of Khonshu. He's used a massive power to create a partial eclipse in order to draw these people here, because they get angry about him using his powers. And now it's all fallen completely flat.
Yeah. And it's interesting, with Harrow saying that Khonshu abused him when he was his avatar, and in turn now is abusing Mark, who is unwell.
Yeah.
And I thought that, really kind of interesting kind of argument, and I love how they bring it back to Mark, where the gods ask him, well, are you? And he says, yes, I am unwell. But it doesn't change the fact that Arthur Harrow is trying to release Ammits.
Yeah, exactly.
And there is the wider mention of an ancient, long-standing feud between then Khonshu and Ammits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, and this for me, so I have a question of how old is Arthur Harrow? I have a question because it does seem somewhat that he and Khonshu, or he was Khonshu's avatar for a period of time.
Quite a long time, I would say.
Quite a long.
Yeah, he knows a lot about him.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, is it going to turn out that, like, Arthur Harrow has been around since Rome?
Maybe.
And something like that. It's extended life that it's one of the gifts of the gods being an avatar. You have extended life. And it's the reason they do believe Arthur is because he was there in these meetings for years. He was part of their quorum. He was there on their council talking as the avatar of Khonshu and or as Khonshu kind of incarnate.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that there's an element to play here as well, which is, he knows Khonshu because he spent millennium with Khonshu.
Maybe.
And we're going to get that nice reveal in episode 6 or a flat. You know, we always get some form of flashback, some kind, even if it's just a hint or a discussion. I'm wondering if we get that, which is like basically Ethan Hawke in Roman garb or Ethan Hawke as in Egyptian. I don't think they'll go Egyptian. Maybe Roman. That's what I'm thinking, Roman, because we know the Romans did go to Egypt. So I'm wondering if it's going to be something like that, which he was like Julius Caesar's second in command or something.
Right.
Well, no wonder he uses a walking stick then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's I can see that. I can definitely see that. One other question I got from the whole Ennead section, I suppose, and from all of the avatars, it seems to me that Mark's the only one being used as a weapon by his god. He's the fist of Khonshu. He's an avatar that's being used to interfere effectively, whereas all the rest of them, because those gods are watchers, they've chosen avatars that are non-violent, it would seem.
Well, I guess if we saw Hathor's avatar, who is representing the goddess of music and love,
she probably wouldn't need
get violent. That would be kind of, I guess her wheelhouse is at theatres, concert halls, gigs.
Yeah.
You know, I guess living statues as well, you know, or something like that.
Yeah.
Then I guess it's kind of in that wheelhouse. So I don't know. Probably something I should have done before, but in terms of the moon god in ancient Egypt, is that equivalent to Mars, say, in of the Roman gods?
Horus or Muntu are the two gods of war in the Egyptian mythology. Then. So we may see Horus incarnate as one of those. And it may just be that he's kind of gone peaceful. He's gone native in his old age. He just doesn't want to interfere. Well,
as I say, all the rest of the gods in the Ennead are watchers. So you're right. They wouldn't need a fist of vengeance. They wouldn't need somebody, but Ammit would. As we heard earlier on, Ammit's a punishing god. That's why her former avatar would have been chosen to be someone that is powerful on Earth. And that's why someone like the former Fist of Khonshu wants to be her new avatar when he eventually frees her, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And so is Khonshu. He is looking for justice once it's happened, though.
Yes.
And, of course, his philosophy goes against the other gods in that he feels they should intervene. They should be there. So he's giving his avatar agency to do vengeance and justice in this world, in a much more dynamic way than certainly it seemed with Yatzil. I guess that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, he's basically telling these gods that with great power that they have comes this responsibility to humans, basically.
Oh, yeah.
You could say they were the first ones to say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Uncle Ben is actually an avatar. Who knows?
Weirder things have happened in Marvel Comics.
True. Can we talk about our next point?
Mm-hmm.
Can we move on? because I want to talk about our half moon point, the sarcophagus of Senfu.
Yeah.
The essentially national treasure / Indiana Jones quest line in this story.
I still can't believe you're even putting those two movies on the same line.
I will continue to put them together until Crystal Skulls is wiped from my memory. National Treasure is the arc in between.
But it's really difficult to edit them out when you mention them over and over again.
I know. But so we do see Marc and Layla reconnect. And it is a fun kind of connection back together, and this discussion of how they move forward on this, which is she is essentially going, you know, no one here. I am your way forward. I know where to get things and move things around.
Yes.
And he does essentially, I think, with a grimace, agree.
Yeah.
And we start to get more of their history on the boat. And I enjoyed this.
Yeah.
So they decide they know where to go to figure out where this sarcophagus is. That Senfu could, because one of the council members basically says to look for Senfu, who was a magi, which was one of the priests back in the day. So they emboldened this person with knowledge so that Senfu would know where Ammit was buried, because someone had to know.
Exactly.
Just
if the gods
case.
ever wanted to free her for some reason in the future, that somebody has to have that knowledge, and it has to be hidden from everybody else. Yeah. Really like this. As you say, a really good Indiana Jones type MacGuffin here.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And we essentially just get the boat trip out to Anton Mogart's, this kind of rich Egyptian man's kind of essentially campus.
Yeah. His compound, I guess.
I think, it's probably a good one.
Exactly. But it was great to see Marc and Layla reconnect. Like, you know, remember what we know of Layla from the beginning is that she spent 4 months trying to get in contact with her husband. And the last time she was in contact with him, he asked her to organize a divorce for the two of them and then disappeared off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
Then she comes and meets Steven, all the way through the last episode, dealing with this person in the body of her husband who's completely different.
Yeah.
And now she's finally reconnecting with him and knows it's Marc. He's having this really interesting chat with her, as you say, on the boat, where they hear the ululating behind them in when the other people on board are dancing along to some music, and Marc's going, "Oh, that reminds me of our wedding."
Yeah.
It's a really tender moment, given that the last time they spoke, he must have told her to get the divorce. You know? So
it is, but at the same time, I really like the agency of Layla here, because she's quite clear that she's in Egypt. It's not to help Marc, but it's to stop Harrow from succeeding, because if he does, then he's going to start killing people like her.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting then around Harrow, because he's talking about justice and snuffing it out before it actually takes place. But I'm wondering, with that line, if it then becomes more of a genocidal justice, a more biased sort of focus on a group of people. Certainly because there was the mention of genocide previously, between the two. So I think this is really interesting. And then, as you say, then still having the tender moment, about we could have handled it together. And, I don't like being kept in the dark. And, this continues through this episode, which is quite nice. They keep touching to this because, in the desert right at the end, I always thought that was the last surprise that I would get.
Yeah.
But there was always another. And it's kind of like she's on tenterhooks because you just don't know what Marc will throw at her.
Exactly.
In that sense. It's really been tough.
Yeah.
So, I thought that was good.
So before we get to the island with Anton, I have one question. Based on the way that Marc says he had this under control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He had DID under control. Do you take it as he's always had this issue or this disorder? And that Steven and the other identities have been around since birth for years? Or is it since essentially he met Layla like he had it in control since they've met. Like it's fine. It's the question I had, because it seems very strange that they were married and around for years and she never noticed. So I'm kind of going, is it a more recent development? And how are they going to talk about that? Like, I'm wondering, that's the question mark I have.
Right. The show will definitely talk about it. I would say that. It's really difficult to talk about this without us being any kind of medical professional or a psychiatric professional, because DID has symptoms that come out very differently in different people. My understanding of it is the old terminology for it was thought to be similar to multiple personality disorder, and that is something that was thought to come on at certain moments, and from then on the personality splits, I think, whereas I think DID is that the identity has been inside and comes to the forefront. So you may have DID for many years without it coming to the forefront. Marc may have been talking to Steven internally for many years, and then Steven started taking control in the last few months. So I, unfortunately, am in no way educated enough to talk about it, but I know the show will do its best to at least put forward what their version of DID is. Yeah. And they have said they've been really respectful of it. They do have consultants on board to talk about it, in the same way they have consultants on board to talk about the portrayal of Egypt. They also have consultants on board to talk about DID, but they have stressed this is an entertainment show. There's so much more about it they won't be able to talk about on the show. Yeah. But they'll certainly get across what this version of their story with Marc and Steven and potentially other identities is. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great way of kind of putting that point to bed.
There you
for
go.
Now.
For now, yes. So it'll definitely come in the future. I know lots of people have ideas about multiple personality disorder and how it's been portrayed in movies in the past, and I don't believe a lot of those are very real. There's a lot of people who think that Marc created the personality of Steven in his mind to deal with something, and I don't think that's how DID works. So I'm going to leave the show explain that better than I can.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of putting things to bed, let's see. The Magi is in his sarcophagus bed, his bed for the next life.
Okay.
That's a transition.
That's a terrible transition, but it's fine. We'll go with it. We'll go with it.
So I really enjoyed this introduction to Anton. Yes. And I'm going to put a hard pause here. Just want to say that the actor who portrays Anton, unfortunately, that is Gaspard Ulliel. He did pass away untimely, basically due to a skiing accident.
Yes, last year.
What, about not even earlier this year, wasn't it? It was just like a couple of months before the airing of the show.
That's right. Yeah.
So it is quite a shame, because I did like his character in this. I did like that he was this kind of suave, kind of debonair, kind of rich kid but was actually,
well, like a black marketeer, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because we do learn how him and Layla have met, and it is in a place we have been to.
Yes.
We visited
Madripoor.
Before. Yes, the black market capital of the MCU, at least. Yeah. And I suppose that's one of the really sad things about his passing. There's so many sad things about it. It's really sad for someone that young to pass away. It did feel like this was setting up something massive in his history or in the future of him in the MCU, because if you haven't seen Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we obviously have discussed it on the podcast, but if you haven't seen it, this idea of this underbelly of the MCU was formulated there in the show. Sharon Carter working in Madripoor. Yeah. And this is connecting these characters of Anton and Layla to that scene in Madripoor. So, potentially that could have spun out into a much bigger story when we get to Captain America 4, the movie 4.
Well, that's it. So, absolutely. Definitely. I mean, it brings not only the underbelly, as you say, but with Sharon Carter's previous history in S.H.I.E.L.D. And the Secret Services. And you think of the talk, say, with the Black Knight around MI6 and so on, that whole sort of area of that Marvel could explore. Whether they will, we don't know. It just, the possibilities become really interesting to see what they could bring here, you know, connecting, because I would have said there would have been no way of connecting Moon Knight with Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I just wouldn't have actually thought that, but we get the drop of Madripoor, and you're like going, oh, okay, yes, you know, and the black
makes
market.
lots of sense,
it suddenly is really sort of the spider web, sort of spins out, doesn't it? Which is really interesting and intriguing ultimately for the Marvel Disney Plus properties.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
In the comic books, the character of Anton Margot is basically a jewel thief called the Midnight Man, who appeared in a couple of comic books with Moon Knight, and he was kind of a dark, kind of cloaked version of Moon Knight with a black cape and all that. And I could see here that they would or could make Anton a high-end art thief.
Yeah, absolutely.
Deal with this, because we see him on the horse. We see him fight with sword. Like, we see him be quite physical in kind of his combat. So you could see him come back from this.
Yeah.
And kind of be a costumed kind of, say vigilante, but not really, a costumed super villain, if you will.
Yeah.
Being an art thief, going and selling his wares in Madripoor, and we see him, like, you could have seen it go. And ultimately, I think they'll leave that for now.
Yeah, as long as his superhero outfit was the loosely fitting pink dressing gown that he was wearing, showing just, you know, part of the Marvel body, then that's fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think he could. I think that could be a really good image on screen. Him in that outfit against Moon Knight.
Yeah.
Pink and white. Why not?
Yeah. Would have worked. Would have worked really well.
I think the other great thing though here is, for me, although the conversation, because Mark needs Steven here as well, in terms of the hieroglyphics and the constellation map on Senfu's body. And with Layla really, you know, trying to hammer home to Mark, we need Steven because of the knowledge that identity has, I thought was really good, because it feels to me it's a little bit of a switch. And I think you get it when Steven at the end is looking at the hieroglyphics in the desert. And because we've had Khonshu say, you've let the idiot in control here in the first episode, and I just get the feeling it's it's that subtle shift in Steven's character, that Steven's identity has maybe not the physical strength, but here is the mind here. It's the brain and the brawn, you know, or the intellectual brain rather than the strategic military brain.
Exactly.
And I just love how, you know, this is just that first step here of the importance of Steven.
Exactly, yeah. Like we did talk about it earlier on in I think episode 2, we were talking about, you know, the potential of these identities working together and finding those moments when it's right for Steven to be there, and the moments that are right there for Mark. It seems like Steven's getting more willing to hand over the body to Mark when there's a massive fight happening. We see that a bit later on in this scene. But Mark seems still quite reluctant to hand over the body to Steven because he thinks he's never going to get it back.
Yes, exactly.
Is where the concern is. So will they kind of be able to balance that out? I presume that's by the end of the season they will be able to have that balance where whichever one is the right identity, they may be able to share a bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's going to be kids with toys, essentially. Remember, share with your playbox.
Yeah. I mean, just speaking of the fight, I mean, it's where the pineapple and cheese cocktail sort of nibbles came from, because I have to say, it was just so funny. I kind of was chuckling away to myself as Mr. Knight appears, as Steven takes over from Mark, and he's just there with all these spears in him, sort of kind of rooted to the training square that he's in, and it was just really, really good. And then you have, the more competent in a fight, Mark sort of at least beginning that fight. And I loved the cape in the shape of the crescent moon as it swoops down.
Yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous shot of that. I just absolutely loved it.
Yeah. There's some great stuff in here. And I wonder if the reason for it is, obviously, by the end of the episode, we know what happens with Khonshu. He's put away, and that means they effectively lose their abilities, or at least the enhancements that he's been able to give them. So we get some great Moon Knight moments here.
Yeah.
The protection of Layla with his cape as he flips all the bullets back around at all the attacking guys from Anton's army, I guess. I thought that was fantastic as well. Yes, him being completely skewered multiple times by spears and being able to get out of that and go back after everybody. These are big powers that Marc and Steven won't have in future now that Khonshu's gone. So I like that we saw so many of them in this episode.
Yeah. I just, for me, this was, do you remember Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls, the second one? Where he had the skewers in each leg.
Exactly.
I wanted to see Mr. Knight do that. It was just like, what the?
That was...
But on each leg, it would have been fantastic.
Definitely.
Just that would have been the final bit of humor. But
it's exactly where my mind went as well. It was just
that's why
so
we're
funny.
friends.
I mean, all I want now is Steven to have asparagus for teeth, and it'll be hilarious.
Okay, so now we know why Chris and John are friends. Why are we friends?
Exactly.
And why are we partners, John?
So look, for me, this was beautiful. It was a great fight. It was the ending that it was just fun to see, and seeing Moon Knight in his garb as he kind of races away and does all the protection. I thought was just good fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and of course, like Layla is pretty handy with in a fight as well. She takes down Anton's sort of head of security, Beck.
Yeah.
So that that was really good. But I mean,
cool.
The thing we just have to sort of troll back on a bit is that this fight occurs because not only is there an uneasy relationship between Layla and Anton.
Yeah.
And he starts getting a bit suspicious when he sees Mark sort of acting weirdly in his eyes at the sarcophagus.
Well, yeah,
but the arrival of Arthur Harrow to this place as well.
Yeah, you say acting weirdly, but like it's a 2,000-year-old sarcophagus that probably cost a lot of money, and this guy's got his hands inside it and messing around with it and folding bits of it. Yeah, I'd get pretty annoyed too. I'd be sending in my security team. But yes, Arthur Harrow has been on their tail the whole time.
Yeah, and it basically destroys the sarcophagus.
Yeah.
Shows the power of Ammit. I just loved all the dust. Thinking, oh, that must be mummified dust remains, I guess. I was like, don't breathe it in, people. Don't breathe it in.
Yeah. That's literally how pandemics start.
Exactly.
Global plagues.
Exactly. Some ancient bug in there. But the interesting thing here is Harrow not only shows the power of Ammit, but he suggests an involvement of the death of Layla's dad. And we get that at the start as well, when Layla is getting her fake Egyptian passport together by the woman, about her father being an archaeologist. But here, there's a suggestion that, Mark has something to do with the unfortunate murder of Layla's father.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which he just sews in there. He's not explicit. He doesn't say, Mark, you've done it.
Yeah.
But it just throws the breadcrumbs down for, that line of questioning for Layla in her own mind, which she does come back to. She does ask him about Harrow's comment, which Mark really just tries to shrug off effectively. He's trying to split us. That sort of defense of it. So this was a nice kind of little sort of grenade or smoke bomb being chucked in as well on top of everything else. And it was also then a kind of a bit to your point earlier about when Mark's DID, began. And I was just wondering, in that murder, would that have been this third personality that it may not have been Marc. It could have been this third personality, given the brutality that we've heard about it, where they were asked to kneel and then executed with a bullet to the head.
Yeah.
So
we heard that from the police officers. That's why they were trying to chase down Marc last episode. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering here if this is another clue to this third identity, the other person here.
I like it.
Yeah.
That'll be very interesting. One last thing just about those scenes around the sarcophagus of Senfu. I just wanted to call out how cool the direction was for the scene with Khonshu flipping around the buildings trying to encourage Marc to take everybody out as well. I really enjoyed seeing him as this kind of spectre hanging over everything that's going on. Not a Marc Spector, another type of spectre. Hanging over the proceedings, watching everything that's going on, encouraging Marc to get even more violent. I thought that was really enjoyable. Anyway, that's it for our half moon point. Let's close out with our total eclipse, our final point for the episode, the imprisonment of Khonshu. So, Layla and Marc out in the desert, trying to work out how to get this constellation and track this constellation. I really like this, this idea. Again, talk about things like Indiana Jones, where you have a MacGuffin that you have to go through a certain process to get through. Things like the Goonies did this really well as well, where you have to go through a certain process. I love that Layla thinks she can resolve it all just by getting her iPad out, taking a photograph of it and trying to match it to the night sky. No, much more complicated than that. It has to be the night sky millennia ago, where it has to match exactly what the constellations were at that time. And there's no possibility of anybody having any photographs, and scientists can only possibly make some kind of predictions about where they think it could be. And we hear from Steven when he eventually takes possession that, it could be the difference of miles just by one slight miscalculation.
Yeah.
It's the same effect that would have happened in Star Trek Picard with the shuttle. It's small movement in the sky very high up can lead to miles of difference actually at the ground.
Oh, wow. Calling back to
Star
Trek.
That's a callback to
Season
Picard.
2,
I will not let this lie.
No.
But anyway.
No, he will not. But do you know what will lie?
Go on.
Marc in the desert. Because he does hand over to Steven, and Steven figures it out pretty quick.
Yeah.
Of like what like how to like that was the fun part. I like that little, like you said, it was the MacGuffin. It's the like when we cross it here and it's a star. There you go. But look at it in the headlights. I enjoyed the hell out of that.
Yeah,
I love this. And both times that we see Steven come back here, he's presented with a problem and he jumps straight into fix it. There's not much whining from him, not much discussion from Steven. It's very much, right, we need you back to do this. And he's like, okay, Grant, I'll do that task. I can whine a little bit while I'm doing the task, but he's really focused on these really interesting things for him to deal with. He's an Egyptologist. He's someone that absolutely loves this period. Yeah. And now he's getting to put all that knowledge into practice. It's really exciting for him, and you see how well it comes across from
it
Steven.
Was. And again, it's, I mentioned about that transformation in the headlights physically, but it's even, you have Marc saying, you're in, really quite confidently. And you have the response of Steven, which is effectively 3 recognitions of that fact, where he's like, yeah, cheers, thanks a lot. It's kind of, I just love that. I thought it's just so well observed in terms of the differences. And I think that is phenomenally good. It really, I've seen it in the other episodes, but this one to me, it felt just so much more direct and front and center in the shots of what they did here.
Well, it felt in the past, it's kind of felt like the camera trickery. You've seen one identity in the mirror and one identity in front of it, and in front of the camera, and then the camera does the switch basically. Whereas here, it does feel like all in camera, all in performance from Oscar Isaac. Really good. Really good. But this is where Khonshu gets himself into trouble, because the
naughty Khonshu.
I know, but the only resolution for this is him turning back the night. I do love that he prefaces this with, I remember the night, I remember every night. It's really about him being the god of the night, the god of the moon. I love that just as a concept for Khonshu. This idea that he's there every night watching over the world, so he remembers every single one of them for millennia. cool idea.
And he knows this is going to end badly. You know, he sets it up. I'll be locked in stone by the gods. Tell Marc to save me, because it's Steven who's helping him sort of do the crystal ball moment with the hands, you know, to spin the night sky back to ancient Egypt.
Yes, absolutely. I do have a question though.
Yeah.
Right. So we know this is a really powerful thing. Him creating an eclipse earlier on in the episode is pretty massive. That probably would have destroyed quite a lot of countries with the amount of ocean movement that would have created. Here he's moving stars in the sky.
Yeah.
And people in Cairo are seeing the stars move in the sky. Is he moving galaxies, or is he creating a vision of it?
So, two things on this. First, I really like that they did they moved to shots showing that people had witnessed this.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't just happening there.
Yeah.
And so that people in Cairo were witnessing. Arthur Harrow saw what he was doing, knew what the consequences were. And then in terms of moving galaxies, I guess so, but I'm thinking that's as a human. As a god, it could be like, you know, you see in the old films where they're going through the press acetates really quickly, scrolling through. For him, it's just like doing that with no real... It's the record of how they move.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's how I kind of thought it. But I mean, you're right. Otherwise... these planets are like being shook round as though they're on a sort of fairground ride.
I'm wondering, are Rocket and Groot suddenly, you know, thrown to the other side of a galaxy, or has a new galaxy just appeared that had disappeared during the last couple of millennia, you know, because Khonshu's messing around? That's a massive power, though.
I guess it's godlike GPS, you know, so that they can, as I say, navigate in the sea of sand.
I wonder, will we see impacts of this power?
Maybe. I think so. I think it's more. I think the impact will be that it's the acetate more. It's the vision of what it looked like back in the day versus the actual movement.
But everybody in Cairo sees it as well.
Oh no! But everyone saw it. Like he changed. He basically changed how the sky looked to everyone.
Or are we saying that everyone on Nova Prime just got got whisked off the planet because they were like just walking down the street, and next thing they're like, whoa! And it's like, you know, they're floating in space now.
That's what I mean.
Yeah,
I love the GPS. What it's like, turn left at the turn. Well, it's not there anymore. Turn right at the star.
Yeah, you never know, and that's. I wonder if this is something that we'll see in Thor: Love and Thunder.
Maybe it could be fun.
Hang on a second. Egyptian god on Earth has just moved all the stars in the galaxies around. You never know.
They could reference that, in fairness, with Taika Waititi being the director. That you could imagine him having a nice little riff on that moment.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. My inner MCU nerd does want to mention, isn't Nova Prime gone? Because that's where Thanos. That's what Thanos destroyed first.
Oh. Yes.
Just to mention, sorry.
You're right.
Sorry, I sometimes forget, given how good Moon Knight is as a show, I actually sometimes forget it's part of the MCU at times. Because it does feel like just a great show on Disney Plus, and sometimes I forget there actually could be massive impacts and massive connections to loads of other movies and TV shows coming up.
So I'm really hoping we get some of that in like episode 5 and 6. Just some more connective tissue, because that is one thing. This feels like it could be a completely separate show, or like universe.
It felt like this episode was setting up that we'll at least see Sharon Carter in episode 4, 5, or 6. Because of that connection to Madripoor. That's what's popping into my head anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway.
But based on all this sky malarkey, Khonshu is imprisoned.
Yeah,
he is stoned.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that is, and I don't know, I think you mentioned it before, is Khonshu being imprisoned in stone by the gods. I guess that, to me, feels as though, you know, he's neutered as someone that can have agency and exert his power, so that we now have Marc and Steven depowered.
Yeah.
If they're even able to summon the robes of Moon Knight or the dapper suit of Mr. Knight. So, you know, that's kind of quite big as well here.
It is, yeah.
You know,
absolutely.
of the implications, it makes Arthur Harrow much more dangerous as well.
Because the only way that Arthur Harrow is able to tap into Ammit's power is because he has a relic of Ammits. He's not getting power from Ammit at all directly. And now it seems like Khonshu can't give his power to Marc or Steven. So, some of those fight sequences that we saw in this episode definitely wouldn't have played out for very long if it wasn't for the power of Khonshu. So, one final bit to touch upon in here is after Khonshu has been changed to the stone statue, he gets a visit from Arthur Harrow. This was really interesting character development for Arthur as well, where he's telling Khonshu, I actually enjoyed being your avatar of vengeance. I enjoyed killing those people you had me kill. And all the success I'm going to have is because of you. I thought that was a really interesting moment between Harrow and the statue.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for me, this really, as you said, character development shows off how sinister Arthur Harrow is going to be.
Yeah.
Like, if he is powered, and I mean fully powered, because as you said, he's just right now channeling a small sliver, it's going to get interesting.
Yeah.
It's like, essentially, it's like, what if Hitler had the powers of Superman?
Well, yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say sinister, because part of me, as he comes into the Great Chamber in the pyramid, and you have the stone figure of Khonshu, I just thought he was going to kind of just like flick it off and smash it or something. Now, I guess that would, again, cause the irk of the other gods. So I guess he wouldn't. But there was part of me thinking, is he going to smash this? So he really messes up Khonshu here, and and his prison. That it's fragments of the prison, So it's harder to find him and release him,
right?
Or something like that.
I feel like that would release Khonshu though.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe smashing it, releases it.
Because we did hear just before Khonshu was imprisoned, he says to Steven, get Marc and tell him to free me. So there is a way to free them.
Yes, definitely. And as you say, loved the sinister vibe then of him speaking to the stone statue. Yeah. Like the end bit, for the torment you placed on me, you forged me. I owe my victory to you.
Exactly.
Like it's just really kind of a nice line.
Absolutely. It is a really good closer for the episode. Speaking of which, closing for the episode, any other notes, anything we haven't talked about the episode that you guys want to talk about?
For me, just very quickly, the opening, where we see Layla's backstory at the beginning with her mum, maybe her auntie, some family friend, someone with a close connection to her, and her father.
It certainly feels like that contact has been used many times to get passports for Layla. She knows her very well, and Layla knows how to use every machine very well. She may just not be able to forge as well as this lady can.
Yeah. I love to kind of, getting the magnifying goggles to put on the head of the lady just at the right time when she needed to check the work. I thought that was really nice.
Yeah. I thought that was really, it was just a nice, like I said, but she's a nice, I want to see this woman again. I want to see this kind of, who she is, what she is, her backstory a bit more, because we barely got anything, so.
Yeah, we barely got anything, but we did get the big kind of reveal of who Layla is and what she does. She's effectively liberating black market items from around the world, bringing them back to the rightful owners, occasionally keeping one or two for herself to pay the bills, as she says. So, which I like. I thought that was quite an interesting idea.
Yep. The only note from my side is at the Ennead we have Horus, Tefnut, Hathor, whose avatar Yatzil there gave the clue for Senfu's tomb. We have Osiris, and I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it correctly, but certainly I think until maybe 10 years ago it would have been pronounced as Isis. Whereas in the episode, it's pronounced as Isis. And maybe that is the correct one, maybe, for sure. So yes, because otherwise, I guess, Isis, has slightly different connotations now, but, they're the 5 that are mentioned, actually. So there's not the 7 or the 9. Yeah. Although Khonshu is there as well. Absolutely. And I guess Arthur is summoned possibly because they know that he's a representative of Ammit for some reason, because of the cane, you know?
No, Arthur's summoned because of the accusation against him. And he was
That's
a former,
true.
the former Fist of Khonshu. So with Ammit, then, that's 7 of them referenced, basically.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so there's still 2
There's
others.
still the 2. Mm-hmm. I guess they're the evil ones.
Or
on vacation.
Or we may hear about them in a future episode.
One is the god of sleep, which meant he didn't get the alarm call, I guess.
Yeah, he's just like, well, wake me when it's over.
I presume Ra, the sun god, wouldn't jump out for Moon Knight, right? Or for the god of the moon. There we go. Yeah. Guys, let's close it out. Do you defend Moon Knight episode 3, John?
I really do. I'm loving this series. I'd give this 5 cocktail Moon Knights out of 5. I just am really into this series. I love it all. The fight scenes, again, just the lovely sequencing with, you know, between Marc, Steven, and who else, you know, question mark. There's the arrogance that Khonshu brings as the god, which, you know, is just funny. Darkly funny, sure, but really enjoyed that. I felt like this triumvirate, you know, beginning to appear between Marc, Steven, and Khonshu. Mm-hmm. I loved the backstory of Layla getting more airtime in terms of her own backstory, but a relationship with Marc. There was the great fight scene again. As I say, I loved the moon cape. I just thought that was classic. Absolutely classic. Oscar Isaac for me. Yes, he's been doing it for the previous 2 episodes, but just the way it was captured with the shots, in terms of moving between Marc and Steven was phenomenal.
Yeah.
We got ancient Egyptian gods. We got inside the Great Chamber of the Great Pyramid at Giza. This was just fantastic.
And modern Cairo as well.
Yeah, modern Cairo as well. We got, you know, Senfu and sort of dusty Senfu as well. So I really enjoyed this episode a lot. So yeah, 5 cocktail Moon Knights out of 5.
3 5s out of 5. 15 out of 15 so far.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
me.
Yeah.
No, I'm really loving this series.
Excellent. How about yourself, Chris?
Very much enjoying this. There's not much more to add outside of what John has already kind of put in there. For me, it's for every question they do answer, they are happily dropping 1 or 2 more.
Exactly.
So where are the other gods? Who are the gods? What do they do? Who is the third identity? So many bits. How will they move forward without Khonshu?
Yeah.
So for me, this was just fantastic. I enjoyed many aspects of this.
Yeah.
Really enjoying it. Looking forward to episode 4.
Excellent.
What about yourself, Derek?
Yeah, loving this series. I said earlier on, I've almost forgotten it's an MCU series because I'm so focused on what's going on in the storyline here with Steven, Marc, and Moon Knight and Layla. And Arthur Harrow, I think that it's a great series. It's written really well. That's not a criticism at all of the other Marvel shows. It felt like sometimes you would spend your time focusing on how does this connect into the MCU when you were watching the other 5 series.
Exactly.
But this really does feel standalone. It really does feel like we're watching a new character from the MCU appearing for the first time in their own story. And we haven't had that for a very, very long time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, they had that baggage as well because they were coming from the MCU.
Exactly.
It had to connect in there. It had to deal with the godly rules of Marvel about consistency all the time.
Yeah.
And, this, as you say, just feels independent.
It does. And the last time I felt this independence was back when we were watching the Defenders shows on Netflix.
Yeah.
That's how we started our Marvel podcast. That's really close to all 3 of us. The shows that we watched as they developed out from Daredevil and Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and Iron Fist and the Defenders. It felt unique. It had slight references to the MCU, but it felt like I was excited every week to get the story of the characters that they were putting on screen. And that's what this feels like. I'm really excited for episode 4. Loved episode 3, especially because of the big deep dive into Egyptian mythology or the mythology of this show in Egypt. Yeah.
And I think it's where the surprise of the name drop of Mudge Report. So it was like, okay. And then, you can see connections, but then you come back out of it because you're suddenly having to deal with the god of the moon moving the night sky, like an acetate slider. So yeah.
Loved it. Let's pop on off to the bar now for our pub quiz, our bar with no name pub quiz.
Yeah, I mean, with that night sky moving, it feels like I've just done the bar game of drinking 20 pints and then spinning myself round a brush and seeing which direction I crash into the bar furniture in the bar with no name.
John, I've known you for 15 years. You couldn't drink 20 pints and stand up, let alone spin around something.
I would just fall asleep.
But what's our third question for our Moon Knight pub quiz?
There certainly was. Fellow quizzers, fellow defenders. Question 3. How many years does Khonshu turn back the night sky over Egypt to help Marc, Steven, and Layla find the tomb of Ammit?
Yes, fellow defenders, you may have noticed we've been avoiding saying that for the whole episode, and it is very weird to avoid saying that, but it is a very specific period of time.
Yes. So what is that time?
Excellent.
Yes.
John,
How many years?
do you want to give it one more time?
Yep. How many years does Khonshu turn back the night sky over Egypt to help Marc, Steven, and Layla find the tomb of Ammit? So, fellow quizzers, send in your answers to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, and you'll be in with a chance to get goodies if you win the pub quiz.
Yes, some Moon Knight.
Moon Knight
not
goodies,
just
absolutely,
regular
not
goodies.
just goodies.
We're not going to just send you sweets. We might if there were Moon
No,
Knight.
we might,
if there were Moon Knight sweets, we'd send them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent stuff. Yes, 3 of 6 questions. Looking forward to seeing who comes out on top of the pub quiz at the end of the season.
Yep. We'll also throw in a pack of Jaffa cakes so you can do your own full moon, half moon, total eclipse.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Yes. So, with that, we move on to feedback, but we must bid farewell to one of our podcast hosts. So, John, in the immortal words of Steven, please chassez away and later's gators.
I don't think
I
Steven,
don't
says
think
sashay
Steven
away.
has sashayed away.
No, but he
to
may
be
go,
honest.
later's gators.
Absolutely. Yeah, fellow defenders, great chatting to you as always. I have to pop out away from the feedback section at this time. So enjoy it with Derek and Chris. And remember, keep watching, keep listening, and keep defending. Laters, Gators. Bye.
Nice. Yes, feedback for episode 2. Let's go back in time to last week. We don't need to spin the night sky to do that. We can just go into emails and go into Facebook. Our first piece of feedback is an email from Coffee and Vodka who says, "Greeting fellow fancy Mr. Moons. This episode was a masterclass in how to intertwine action with exposition in less than 45 minutes. An entire season's worth of answers were served up on a battered silver platter, up to and including both Moon Knight outfits, and it's only the second entry in the series. Mohamed Diab is showing an almost dangerous amount of confidence in what narrative means. Would this make him the anti-Berlanti? Everyone shined like a moon on a clear night with the exception of May Kalamaway, who either had too little to do in this episode or is unable to match the emotiveness of her co-stars. Future shows will tell. As always, the special effects were superb and the score thrilled me in a way unfelt since the Darth Vader march. Finally, the juxtaposition of Marc as the realistic pragmatist and Steven, with a V, as the stubbornly innocent child was played beautifully. 5 Steven sackings, Luger lockers, and cataclysmic canes out of 5. Peace and take care, Coffee and Vodka. I love it, Coffee and Vodka. The anti-Berlanti, just in case there are some Marvel fans who don't know who that is, Greg Berlanti was the person that ushered the CW DC shows into absolute obscurity by stretching his shows with one basic premise into 22 episode seasons for 25 seasons, telling almost no story per episode. So yes, definitely Mohamed Diab is the anti-Berlanti. He's putting in tons and tons of information every episode.
Yes, thank you, Coffee and Vodka. And I will say, with your tongue twisters of 5 Steven stacking Luger lockers and cataclysmic canes, I'm like, wow, come on, we have to read that out.
I love it. Well done, Coffee Vodka.
Yeah, thank you so much, Coffee Vodka. We also got an email from the one and only Victor Sellers, who had this to say: "Greetings, defenders. It was nice to see more of Marc in control. Steven better get some combat training if he wishes to continue as Mr. Knight. Perhaps Layla could train him.
Ooh, I like
Is Crowley sentient, What was that in Steven's mind? The Moon Knight Jackal battle was amazing. Arthur Harrow is just another cult leader. He is not the avatar of Ammit. So what is his endgame? Resurrect her and hope she favors him? Did Mark really kill those archaeologists in Egypt? I suspect it was Harrow. It seems the only trustworthy characters are Layla and Steven. Oscar Isaac is really shining in these multiple roles. As always, looking forward to your podcast and Defenders feedback. Excelsior, Victor Von Doom. P.S. Do you remember when the West Coast Avengers were lost in time and Khonshu sent Mark to their rescue? I don't. Thanks, Victor. That West Coast Avengers is a bit of a black hole for me.
Yeah.
Because it was always it was known as the lesser man's Avengers for a while, more just based on the fact that it was kind of like initially a number of B-list kind of the team, led by Hawkeye. So I was just like you had Wonder Man in there, like Nathan Fillion's Wonder Man. It was when he was the movie star Wonder Man versus anything else, and you're like, it never got to me. But it did lead to some of the best, what we have now seen, best storyline, like the Vision, Scarlet Witch storylines that were turned into WandaVision. Like a lot of that has stemmed out of the West Coast Avengers. So apparently, I should go back at some point, but. Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah, I haven't read that one myself either, Victor. That's a really interesting one. I'd like to check that out. Although I wonder if Into the Night, the Moon Knight podcast, have reviewed that issue. It sounds like an issue that they would have reviewed. Probably.
I like it. Head on over to Ray's Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast.
The Moon Knight podcast, in fact.
It is the one.
Go check that out.
The only.
As for your comments on the last episode, Victor, it's interesting. Almost exactly the same as Coffee and Vodka said. They're providing these answers as quickly as you can think of the questions, it seems. It's very quick here. Arthur Harrow is not an avatar of Ammit. His end game is to resurrect her and hope that she favors him. He's following her teachings. And he expects that he could be chosen as the avatar, probably because he's already been an avatar in the past for her greatest nemesis, effectively. So if he resurrects her, likely that he's going to be chosen, which I really like. Something I learned this week, Chris, partially because of Victor's email here. Did you know that living statues, the idea of them is pretty much localized to the UK and Ireland, maybe some European countries, but there's a lot of people who didn't understand that the person that Mark is talking to is an actual person. They thought it was a statue that he was sitting beside and talking to in episode 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is a weird. Okay. So
a living statue, we would see them all the time in Dublin city centre, in London, and in all the major cities in the UK and in Ireland. It's effectively a form of performance art where someone dresses up, tries to look as like a statue as they can, and occasionally might move to scare the kids who think it's a real statue. But apparently it hasn't translated outside of the UK and Ireland.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
That it hasn't, because it should be an art form that dies slowly. I have walked by one or two of these guys, not even thinking, just talking to one, and they run and jump at you, and you're like, ah!
I love it. So yes, to answer Victor's question, he is sentient. He is a person. You actually see that Stephen's bought him lunch. I do wonder whether he's ever had an actual conversation with Crowley. After work, have they had a conversation? Because he does know what type of food he wants, for example. I don't know how that would have come across. So it's a really good gag that Stephen's talking to a living statue who can't respond to him. But I wonder if they ever have had a conversation at some point in the past.
I'm hoping in episode 6, essentially, we go, oh God, you again, leave me alone.
I love it. I love it.
It'd be amazing.
Thanks so much for that, Victor.
Yes.
Let's head on over to Facebook for some Facebook feedback. First up, Brandy Lee Sanderson says, another great episode. I'm not a comics reader, but I know there are 3 personalities in the comic. Mark, Steven and Jake. Maybe Steven losing his job is why Jake becomes a cabbie. Maybe it even brings Jake more into the mix. Though I thought last week he was probably the one to ask out the tour guide. Especially having met Layla, this episode makes Mark even less likely, and we know it wasn't Steven. Oh, I like that, Brandy.
God, I hadn't thought about that, yeah.
That Jake was in there. Now, I'm not too sure how much they're going to cleave to who Jake was in the comic books, whether he'll be a cab driver or not, whether that will even play out in the show at all. For example, Stephen Grant isn't a shopist in the comic books. He's a completely different person in the comic books. So I'm not too sure how they're going to cleave to it. It seems like Jake may be just the massively violent identity among the three that we're going to see in the show.
The crazy one.
Yeah. Bradley continues, I have heard in the run of the comics, Steven and Jake are aliases Marc made with very detailed backstories, but he started to believe they were real. I think that is the take the show is taking because Layla mentioned Steven as one of his fake identities. Obviously, Steven's personality is heavily based on Layla and her interest, and maybe that's why Marc kind of protects him from Khonshu. Yeah, this is where the complication comes in with how Marvel are going to be talking about DID in their show. I feel like they're not going to get into the argument of Marc created personalities, because that's not how DID works. They're not personalities created by Marc. DID is distinct identities. These are identities that are completely independent of each other, and work within the same system effectively. So I know we will all fall back on the tropes that we've seen of personality disorders in the past in movies, because we're not as knowledgeable about these types of disorders at all. But I don't think Marvel are going to go down the path of saying a creation point and why Marc created these personalities. I think it's going to be a bit more complex than that.
Yeah. No, and that was what the original comic book storyline was, that he slowly just started to believe his own personalities. And then that was back in the 70s, 80s. And then they moved into he actually had multiple personality disorder, as they called it back then. And then in the more recent runs, they have started to explore, actually, no, in all of this has been DID for years. It was like, this is the real storyline. This is how it really happened. As they've, as the writers themselves of the comic book have looked into what DID is and try to approach it from a better perspective.
Exactly.
So I think they'll lean into more that version of it, but again, until we see, like, they'll probably have even more of their own take. But we'll see. Yeah,
absolutely. Bradley continues, knowing Ethan Hawke based his portrayal of Arthur Harrow off of David Koresh, the leader of the Branch Davidians cult behind the Waco siege, just adds another layer to the creepiness factor. I totally agree with that. Yes. Bradley says, I have to say that I enjoyed the introduction of Mr. Knight and his suit more than I did Moon Knight last week, because I really thought they were just going to get a reenactment of what probably took place with that window in the Swiss Alps that led to Steven waking up with the broken, dislocated jaw. Instead, we got a Q Deadpool superhero landing. But not to be outdone, here comes Moon Knight. The transition was amazing. I love that you could see the crescent moon in his eyes before they went fully white. I don't know how it is in the comics, but the way I heard someone speak about it, it seems like Mr. Knight is the detective, but it is still through Marc, almost like he is one of Moon Knight's personalities. But this seems like Mr. Knight was through Steven, more like his superhero alter ego. I like it. Other than that, I like the use of camera to help tell the story and getting Steven's viewpoint of being inside. Oh, and Steven is funny, and it works in a natural way instead of being like trying to lighten the mood of the episode. On the final scene, the room in Egypt, the reflection has blood on his hands, but the actual person doesn't. So, A, could it have been Jake in the hotel room and Marc in the mirror? Because I don't see Steven staying in the hotel room and drinking. I also question Marc drinking while he's trying to keep control away from Steven. B, could this actually be a flashback to when Marc had his mental break? Or C, could it be, as we assume, and Marc has control, but the blood on his hands is in reference to Steven's earlier statement that he had blood on his hands due to Marc's actions? Ooh, loads of really interesting theories there, Brandy. And I did not notice that there was no blood on one of their hands. That's really interesting.
I never noticed that either. So I think we're going to get like a reveal later of when the third identity is. You'll be like, I was in control during this part. Flashback. I was in control of this part. Flashback.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite likely. And it's really interesting, Brandy, again, not being a comic reader, but knowing the other personality, you're able to pick up some of these cues as well, that possibly Jake was in control at that point. But I think you're right. I think we're going to see Jake, has been an identity for a lot longer than we think. We may see that in the future episodes. I'm sure we will see it in the future episodes, in fact. But thanks so much for your feedback, Brandy. Always good to hear from you.
Yes, thank you so much. We also got some feedback from Dr. Bob Phillips, who had this to say. Cool. This gets better and twistier and leaping in all sorts of directions. much as a psycho Colonel Sanders might do, loving the adventuring, the nods to Dr. Jones, Miss Croft, and the exquisite Savile Row tailoring. It's not a dream, but it's not entirely in the world of the visible. I'm up for learning more and more as the series unfolds. Ooh. Thanks, Dr. Bob. Yeah, it's really interesting to see that they get like that you can't see these death dogs, the hounds of Harrow. Mm-hmm. I do like that, actually. Hounds of Harrow. I'll keep that one. I enjoy that they do this, that the mystical elements are something just out of the visible realm, but are still kind of are able to interact. So you do see the crushing of the parts of the car, the bumper and things like by the dog, as it's thrown around as well by Mark even. So it'd be interesting to see where that gets to and how that gets further.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting idea there, Dr. Bob. Claire Laffer says, when I watched episode 2 with my mom, she just kept saying, he really is very handsome, isn't he? Every 10 minutes or so. Oh, another Oscar Isaac fan on board there, and your mom, Claire. Love it. Yeah.
Just get her to watch Dune. She'll love it even more. He has a beard.
Yeah. Beards do it for some people. Joe Stimley says the acting in this show is incredible across the board. I'm now starting to wonder if Mark created Steven to protect himself from the pact he made with Khonshu. I already kind of hate Mark for what he's doing, and if he lets anything happen to Steven, he'll see my fist of vengeance. Oh, I love it.
Thanks, Joe. Finally, we have some feedback from Reynaldo from Into the Night, the Moon Knight podcast. Ronaldo starts with another episode chock full of development, and this time the focus is on Harrow, Khonshu, and Mark. Love the nod to the comic book where Mark's sketchy past as a mercenary and his supposed crimes at a quote-unquote dig site. It's the closest thing to alluding to Bushman, one of Moon Knight's greatest nemesis in the comic books, so that had me giddy with glee. Ronaldo went on to say, admittedly, the intro to Mr. Knight, though very cool, had me managing my expectations on the fly. Things such as the Moon Knight costume and Steven were kind of announced during the trailer, which gave me time to get acquainted with the change. The intro to Mr. Knight was a bit of a shock, as he has a different origins in the comic book, but I note that Mark is also dressed as Mr. Knight in the reflections, so this may mean that Mr. Knight isn't exclusive to Steven. It's interesting to see, as it seems apparent that the costumes are linked to the identities. Moon Knight is Mark with the suit, Mr. Knight is Steven with the suit. This differs from the comic in that both Moon Knight and Mr. Knight are actually additional identities alongside Mark, Steven, and Jake. I admire the interpretation they've gone for in the show, and perhaps with a bit more time in the suit, Steven will develop Mr. Knight into more of a sleuth, which is a component of his personality in the comic books.
Excellent stuff, Ray. Thank you so much for that, Brandy. If you're wondering why I didn't answer your question about who is Mr. Knight in the comic, was he the investigator? Ray's explained it really well there. I knew that was coming up. So there's your answer. That's who Mr. Knight is in the comic. It is very different in the show, so very difficult to parse out exactly what bits they're going to take for the comics or not. But Ray is our go-to for that information, definitely.
Yes, thank you. It's almost like Derek wrote the feedback section.
It's almost like I put them in that order. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Almost. Ray went on to say, loved how Khonshu is established as a god out of favor with other deities and as a liar. Although Khonshu is a higher power, he is severely flawed. And it is these character traits that make Khonshu's dynamics with Mark and Steven so exciting. I mean, should we or Mark be nervous that this sort of deity is guiding Mark's actions? We should. We really should, Ray. Ray finished out by saying, Layla is fantastic addition, and I enjoyed how she assumed Mark was giving her coded signals during the awkward conversation with Steven over the phone in episode 1. I guess she gives too much credit to Mark and generally knows nothing of Steven. Overall, a solid episode, and its ending with Mark in Egypt just opens the door to even bigger adventure. Multiple viewings of this episode will be filling my time until next Wednesday.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Ray. And I'm assuming, I think I caught that you've checked it out about at least 3 times based on Twitter and Discord. So maybe there has been even more viewings since then.
Mm-hmm. I know I'm up to 5 on both the first 2 episodes. And then I've only watched this episode 3 times now. So
that's not too bad. You still got 2 more to go.
2 more to go. Exactly. Yeah. It's that kind of show, though. I'm just really, really enjoying watching it a couple of times and picking up extra stuff each time I watch it. And so good to hear Ray on board talking about the show. I know we wanted to get Ray on the podcast talking about it. He's doing 3 podcasts a week on Moon Knight, and also the comic books are coming out as well. So he's doing podcast episodes about the comic books as well. I hope we get to talk to Ray about it, but I'm so glad he's sending this feedback to us, because great to hear from a full on Moon Knight obsessive.
Aficionado.
Let's call him obsessive. He won't mind.
I was going to go aficionado.
That's a much nicer word for Chris.
Yes, there you go. Much better.
Thank you, Ray. We also got an email in from Christina Jones from Black Girl Couch Reviews, who says, "Hello, lovelies. Just wanted to show some quick love and support for your podcast. As someone that knows nothing of the comic, your commentary has been a boon. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Oscar Isaac is hands down the best actor I have seen from the Marvel series cast. 2 episodes in, and I am glued to his performance, as it's far more layered than any of the action scenes. Ethan Hawke is a great villain, channeling his inner David Koresh with that hairstyle. That's all for now. I'll try to drop a line before the finale. Laters, Gators. P.S. I must watch this show with an IV of H2O in my veins, because the thirst is real." I love it, Christina. Yes, love Oscar Isaac in the show. And Ethan Hawke, absolutely fantastic. Great to hear from you, Christina. We also have a voicemail in from New Zealand from our wonderful friend Anwin.
Hello, Defenders. It's Anwin here. I am really enjoying Moon Knight. I didn't know anything about the character, didn't know the comics, nothing. So it's been no expectations, and I've been really pleasantly surprised and pleased with it. I think the balance of the action and the humour is really great. Oscar Isaac is just a beautiful human being, and it's really cool to see his acting prowess in this show, because I totally buy that he's just meek and mild dude when he's playing Steven, and then changes instantly when he's Marc, and it's really great to see. I'm enjoying seeing Ethan Hawke as well, but unfortunately it's making me feel really old, because I had a teenage crush on Ethan when we were both teenagers. He's only 3 years older than me, and when I see him playing the wizened old man, it makes me feel really old. Anyway, thanks so much for your coverage. I'm listening every week and really enjoying the chance to get some of the background on all of the comic stuff and the characters. So keep up the great work. Bye.
Thank you so much, Almond. Great to hear from you as well. Yeah, it is kind of weird seeing Ethan Hawke, someone that we know from the 80s and 90s, as someone of our age group, now playing like elder roles. I think he's in the movie Northman as well, coming out soon, where he's the elder of a tribe. So yeah, it's a bit weird, but very cool. Thanks so much for listening along, Almond. And finally, we have a voicemail in through our website from tvpodcastindustries.com. Unfortunately, they didn't leave their name. So thank you very much, though, for sending it in.
Hello, my question about Moon Knight is why Marc Spector's Jewish identity has not yet been addressed in the show. As someone who has origins as a Middle Eastern Jew, it would be very meaningful if this was discussed. Also, because of the nuance of the Egyptian god, in a sense, trapping or even enslaving Marc Spector. I feel that this is sort of a difficult setup that needs to be addressed. And especially the timing of the show. Passover is in a couple of weeks, and it tells the story of the entire Jewish population being enslaved by the Egyptians. And so I was curious what your take was. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your voicemail and taking the time to record it and send it in. Once again, similar to DID, I don't have all the answers from the show, certainly about their choices that they've made. I know they've absolutely hired a Judaism consultant for the show. I think she's in the credits each time. Sarah Bassin is on board. It's been made really clear by Oscar Isaac that the character is Jewish in the show. My expectation, I think, Chris, you mentioned this before, that we always get a flashback episode. We always get an episode that talks about the history of the character at some point in all the Disney Plus series. I'm expecting that to be episode 5 or episode 6. So we'll probably see a bit more of Mark in regular society or in his past. Whereas so far in these episodes, even up to episode 3, we haven't spent a huge amount of time with Mark other than on his mission to stop Ammits. So we haven't really had much of an opportunity to get to know him at all. I think even by episode 3, all we really know about him was that he was once married to Layla and that he has been accused of murder. And that's kind of it. We don't really get many conversations about who he is.
Agreed. I actually don't even know if they will. They may, I think the consultant may be there just to make sure that they don't inadvertently make any untoward kind of connotations or anything like that, because I'm questioning if we do get a longer flashback episode. I'm as I know I said this earlier in the podcast. I'm just now.
You're questioning yourself, Nick.
I'm questioning myself because we're on a run here. Like we're on a clock, if you will, of hey, we have to get to by the end of episode 6. If this was at least an 8 episode arc, I'd be like, okay, yeah, we'd get a full one. But we're at the halfway point, and essentially, there's a lot to do, and there's no Khonshu. We're getting further and further into this season, so I don't know if we will. I think they may allude to it, or it may be a passing reference.
I feel like it's going to be a big miss if they don't do it on here, in the same way that they've missed on so many occasions bringing in LGBTQ characters over the years, where they've just casually mentioned that Loki's bisexual and think their job is done. In here, if you don't have Marc Spector as a Jewish character and you don't call it out in the show in some meaningful way, I think it would be a big miss for Marvel. You only have one opportunity to do this, as we've said before. Oscar Isaac has only signed up for this show, and he's been really clear that it will be shown. So I think it would be a big miss if they don't have something in the episodes that's really clear. Why would they hire a consultant if they weren't going to try and deal with it on the show? Would be the way I'd look at it. I feel like they have done it before, though. As I said, we had talked before about their representation on their shows in the past and on their movies in the past, but it felt like Feige was moving closer to showing real representation rather than just alluding to it or nods to it or one line of dialogue. So I'm really hopeful that we'll see it in a future episode. But I think the reason why we haven't seen it so far is, as you say, Chris, we're going at a bullet train pace for the 3 episodes so far. There's only been one small reference in the show so far, with the Star of David being on the body of Oscar Isaac, when he's arrived in Egypt and he's drinking that bottle of whiskey. You see a Star of David necklace on him, but only a small reference there. And right now we don't know whether that's Mark or whether that's maybe Jake, but it is on the body, I guess. And we did get a bit of a reference in this episode about the fact that Khonshu is possessing and abusing Mark. Mark does feel like he's being taken advantage of by Khonshu. So I think they may be setting some of the groundwork for being able to discuss this in future, and I hope they do. I really do hope that they use real representation, not just pay lip service to it again. But thanks so much for your voicemail. If anybody else wants to leave us a voicemail, you're more than welcome to. You can either record an MP3 of up to 90 seconds of your thoughts, email it to us at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or do what Anonymous did, pop on over to the website at tvpodcastindustries.com and leave your thoughts on there. Everybody else, if you want to send in your feedback, you can email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or once again, pop over to our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tvpodcastindustries.
Yes, if you like what you have heard throughout this episode, don't forget you can head on over to patreon.com to support us. And this episode of TV Podcast Industry was brought to you by one of our supporters over on Patreon, and that is the one and only Jamie Lawton. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks so much for all of the supporters over there on Patreon, bringing the show to you every week. Really, really good to have all of you on board supporting us.
Yes, again. And of course, if you can't support us on an ongoing basis, you can get us a one-off coffee by heading on over to buymeacoffee.com/TVPI, and it keeps Derek, our illustrious editor, in caffeine. It is useful.
Absolutely.
Trust me, when he does these long edits, it is very helpful.
Yes. 2 episodes a week and over an hour and a half. The episodes are running at the moment, so that does take quite a lot of my time. So all the coffee is required. But if you can't support us monetarily, you can, of course, support us by sharing the podcast, because sharing the podcast is sharing the love.
Yes, and if you don't know what to share the podcast, you can head on over to tvpodcastindustries.com, where you can subscribe to each and every platform. It's all there. It's Khonshu. It's Ammit themed. It's everything. You know where to go. Don't forget, if you're also over on Spotify, you can leave us a like, because those do help with the visibility. With all that said and done, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here for this episode. We'll be back later this week with Star Trek Picard, the next episode.
Coming up to episode 7 of Star Trek Picard. So 3 episodes left of Moon Knight, and just 3 episodes after that one of Star Trek Picard. And then I think we finish both of those series the week that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness comes out as well. So
yeah,
lots and lots of chatting and discussing going on about wonderful programs. I'm really looking forward to episode 4 of Moon Knight as well, though.
Yes, it's going to be fantastic.
Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again next time.
Yes, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Speak to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.